Good day, everyone. I am Jessamay Parkon, and I will be discussing the Civil Engineering Code of Ethics and Obligations. So, first is let us identify the objectives. First is to identify the Civil Engineering Code of Ethics and Obligations, and then to know its importance. So here are some of the terms that we're going to encounter throughout our discussion. So first is civil engineering. So I think everybody's familiar with this because this is our course. So second is code of ethics. So code of ethics is the guide of principles designed to help professionals conduct business honestly and with integrity. Third is the fundamental canons, the body of rules, principles, or standards accepted as axiomatic and universally binding in the field of study or art. Then lastly is principle. Fundamentals, truth, or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system or belief or behavior or for a chain of reasoning. So before we proceed to the code of ethics of civil engineering, let us first discuss what is civil engineering. So civil engineering is a professional engineering discipline that deals with the design, construction, and maintenance of the physical and naturally built environment, which includes roads, bridges, canals, dams, airports, sewerage system, pipelines, structural components of buildings and railways, and also civil engineering, possibly the oldest engineering discipline. And then let us discuss a brief history of civil engineering. It is difficult to determine the history of emergence and beginning of civil engineering. However, that the history of civil engineering is a mirror of the history of the human beings on this earth. Man used to use the old shelter caves to protect themselves of weather and harsh environment and use a tree trunk to cross the river, which being demonstration of ancient age civil engineering. Civil engineering has been an aspect of life since the beginning of human existence. The earliest practice of civil engineering may have commenced between 4000 and 2000 BC or before Christ in ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, which is called Iraq today, when humans started to abandon a nomadic existence, thus causing a need for the construction of shelter. During this time, the transportation became increasingly important, leading the development of wheel and sailing. Until modern times, there was no clear distinction between civil engineer and architect, and the term engineer and architect were mainly geographical variations referring to the same person, often used interchangeably. The construction of the Pyramid of Egypt might be considered the first instances of large construction of a structure. So let us proceed to the Code of Ethics. So first is, what is Code of Ethics? Code of Ethics is the study of the characteristics of morals. Ethics also deals with the moral choices that are made by each person in his or her relationship with other person. It is also a guide of principle designed to help professionals conduct business honestly and with integrity. A code of ethics document may outline the mission and values of the business or organization, how professionals are supposed to approach problems, the ethical principles based on the organization, core values, and the standards to which the professional is held. So, as we all know, all of the profession have their own ethics. So we as a future engineer, we also have, we should know what is the code of ethics of civil engineering. So, civil engineering code of ethics states that the moral responsibilities of engineers as seen by the profession and as representative by a professional society because they express the profession's collective commitment to ethics. Codes are enormously important, not only in stressing engineers' responsibility, but also in support the freedom needed to meet them. Engineering is an important and learned profession. As members of this profession, engineers are expected to exhibit the highest standards of honesty and integrity. Engineering has a direct and vital impact on the quality of life for all the people. So, these are the civil engineering ethics. So, first is we have honesty. So, honesty is telling the truth, adherence to the facts. Second is we have impartiality. Impartiality can be described as the principle that decisions ought to be based on objective criteria rather than based on bias, prejudice, or preferring to benefit one person over another for improper reasons. So impartiality is sticking to the rules. Uh, Next is fairness. From the word fairness, I mean from the word fairness. So it is concerned with action, process, and consequence that are morally right, honorable, and equitable. Fair decisions are made in an appropriate manner based on appropriate criteria. Then fourth is equity. Equity is the absence of avoidable or remediable differences among groups of people, whether those groups are defined socially, economically, demographically, or geographically. So sometimes equality and equity are compared, but they are different from each other. So equality is when everybody gets treated the same, while equity is everybody gets what they need based on their own situation. Then fifth code of ethics is dedicated to the protection of public health, safety, and welfare. Next is the importance of an engineering ethics. So, engineering ethics is the study of moral values, issues, and decisions involved in engineering practice. So, the following are the moral values that takes many forms. So, first is responsibilities. Second is ideal character traits. Then social policies. Fourth is relationship desirable for individuals. Then lastly is the corporation engaged in technological development. So why ethics important as an engineer? So any decisions an engineer made must include the consideration of the public. And as a professional, of course, our main goal should be to do more good than harm. So in this next slides is the result of ethical equation. So on the left side is the ethical behavior that an engineer should do, while on the right side is the unethical behavior. So in the ethical behavior, an engineer should always use quality products because second second rate products may affect the uh, structure. The next is conservation of resources. Of course, dili ta pwede um mag-spend og too much money sa product na, I mean, if kung unsa ang price, syempre dapat mao lang pud atong pagawas na kwarta. Then pride in work, of course, if you know na na you're doing good, I mean, na gi-follow nimo ang ethics as an engineer, maka ingon jud ka na mapagmalaki jud nimo ang imong gihimo. Then next is public safety. So one of the an engineer must always consider is the safety of the public, then timeliness. And then if you follow all this ethical behavior or mm, the code of ethics of a civil engineer, so it will result to a good business. While on the other side is the unethical behavior. So unethical behavior is an action that falls outside of what is considered morally right or proper for a person, a profession, or an industry. So first is shoddy product. So when we say shoddy, it means poor quality, low grade, second rate, or cheap. Next is waste, fraud, and greed. So waste, then fraud, which is cheating, then greed is an intense selfish desire. Then next is abuse of expertise. Then guilt and fear. Then lack of safety. Then cutting concerns, which is a poor design and rush testing. So it will result to a disaster. So next is these are some of the ethical issues or dilemmas faced by engineers. First is we have public safety. The engineer has an obligation to the employer but also to protect the society. Sometimes he or she may force to neglect the safety checks to meet with the production targets. Next is bribery and fraud. Corruption is dishonest and fraudulent conduct by those in power. An engineer may be bribed to give permit to a potential harmful project. Third is environmental protection. Generally, the engineering goals and environmental goals are conflicting. Engineers today are grappling with the ethical dilemmas posed by the conflicts between economic and environmental requirement of their work. Fourth is fairness. An engineer's decision will have an impact on the variety of different groups of people. As a professional, an engineer has a duty to treat all these people fairly. It is sometimes difficult to identify exactly who will be affected by a particular decision and what their interests are. Fourth is honest in research and testing. So for the number five, for example, in road construction, 'di ba, the concrete will need a 28 days curing. Pero kayang engineer, nagdali-dali man, instead na 28 days, gibuhat niya nga 14 days lang. So, dalam, next is conflicts of interest and values. There exist conflicts between the professional values of engineering and business values. So sometimes, instead na mag Then conflict of interest is often a common issue faced by many people in their profession, whereas one professional interest comes in conflict with personal interest. So, for example, as an engineer, you have the right to hire workers, right? So, though ang imong relative kay dili siya kabalo magpanday ah pero kay relative man nimo siya gihire gihapon nimo siya, so that's an example of conflict of um professional interest with personal interest. So why do we need to study engineering ethics? Engineering ethics should be studied because it is important, of course, both in preventing grave consequences of faulty ethical reasoning and in giving meaning to engineers' endeavors. But it is complex. It cannot be understood through casual observations. So, this, the following are the reasons why we need to study engineering ethics. The first is to increase the awareness of importance due to publicity surrounding high-profile engineering failures. Next is engineering decisions can impact public health, safety, business practices, and politics. Third is engineers should be aware of moral implication as they make decisions in the workplace. Next is ability to think critically and independently about moral issues. Next is study of ethics helps engineer develop a moral autonomy. Then the ability to apply this moral thinking to situations that arise during professional engineering practice. All in all, every decisions an engineer must make always includes the consideration of the public. Next is there are some instances that the code, the code of ethics of civil engineering are abused. So when codes are not taken seriously within a profession, um, they amount to a kind of window dressing that ultimately increases public cynicism about profession, cynicism or doubt. Worse, codes occasionally suppress argument within the profession and are abused in other ways. Probably the worst abuse of engineering codes is to restrict honest moral effort on the part of individual engineers to preserve the profession's public image and to protect status quo or the current situation, and an excessive interest in protecting the status quo may lead to a distrust of the engineering profession on the part of both government and the public. On a rare occasion, abuses have discouraged immoral conduct and caused serious harm to those seeking to serve the public. For example, two engineers were expelled from American Society of Civil Engineers or the ASCE for violating a section of its code forbidding public remarks critical of other engineers. Yet, the actions of those engineers were essential in uncovering a major bribery scandal related to the construction of a dam in Los Angeles County. Next is let us discuss the fundamental principles. As stated in the Code of Ethics of Philippine Institute of Civil Engineers or PICE, civil engineers uphold and advance the integrity, honor, and dignity of the civil engineering professions by the following of these four principles. So first principle, a civil engineer uphold and advance the integrity, honor, and dignity of the civil engineering profession by using their knowledge and skill for the enhancement of human welfare and environment. Next is being honest and impartial and serving with fidelity and fidelity to public, their employers slash employees and clients. Next is striving to increase the competence and prestige of the civil engineering profession. And lastly, supporting the professional and technical societies of their disciplines. So these four principles are the um, fundamental principles of civil engineering that is stated in the Code of Ethics of the PICE. But in my written report, I have written three more principles that is stated by Geoff French, which is the ICE or the Institution of Civil Engineer president. So next is the fundamental canon. So fundamental canon talks about the central importance of exhibiting honesty and integrity. It helps engineers to ensure the quality and standard service to give for all people's lives. First, first is civil engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public and shall strive to comply with the principles and sustainable development in the performance of their duties. If engineers' judgment is overruled under the circumstances that endangered life or property, they shall notify their employer or client and such other authority as may be appropriate. Engineers shall approve only those engineering documents that are conformity with applicable standards. Also, engineers shall not reveal facts, data, or information without the prior consent of the client or employer, except as authorized or required by law or this code. Engineers shall not permit the use of their name and associate in business ventures with any person or firm that they believe is engaged in fraudulent, unlawful, and dishonesty enterprise. Next is civil engineer shall perform services only in areas of their competence or expertise. Engineers shall undertake assignments only when qualified by education or experience in the specific technical fields involved. Engineers shall not affix their signatures to any plans or documents dealing with subject matter in which they lack competence nor to any plan or document not prepared under their direction and control. So, syempre, as an engineer, if wala ka kabalo kung unsay mga nahitabo dira, dili ka magpasurang-surang no nga mag-imo-imo ka nga wala ka kabalo kay if ever if magpirma ka sa mga plano na dili ka sure na safety tapos imo pangalan nakabutang ang mahitabo ikaw na hinuon ang mahimong sa ba ma-blame god sa kanang kung unsa may nahitabo sa katong project nga imong gipirmahan. So next is a civil engineer shall issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner. As an engineer shall be truthful in professional reports, statements, or testimony. They shall include or all relevant and pertinent information in such reports. Statements or testimony which should bear the date of indicating when it was current. Engineers may express publicly technical opinions that are founded upon knowledge of the facts and competence in the subject matter. So, dapat tanan ni istorya sa engineer is always tinuod og ang tanan na i-report niya is according to a relevant information. So fourth is civil engineer shall act in professional matters for each employer or clients as faithful agents or trustees and shall conflicts of interest. Engineer shall disclose all known or potential conflicts of interest that could influence or appear to influence their judgment or the quality of their services. Engineers shall not solicit or accept financial or other valuable consideration, directly or indirectly, from outside agents in connection with the work for which they are responsible. Engineers shall not solicit or accept a contract from governmental body in which a principal or officer of their organization serves as a member. Next is civil engineers shall build their professional reputation on the merit of their services and shall not compete unfairly with others. Engineers shall avoid deceptive acts and solicitation of professional employment. Avoid deceptive acts. Sixth is civil engineer shall act in such a manner as to uphold and enhance the honor, integrity, and dignity of the civil engineering profession. And lastly, civil engineers shall continue their professional development throughout their careers and shall provide opportunities for the professional development of those civil engineers under their provision. Next is the obligations of civil engineers. So first is the civil engineer shall perform the scope of services as stated in section of the Republic Act number 544, which is the Civil Engineering Law, Article 1, Section 2, Congress of the Philippines, June 17, 1950, as amended by the Republic Act number 1582. So according to Article 1, Section 2, the practice of civil engineering within the meaning and intent of this act shall embrace services in the form of consultation, design, preparation of plans, specification, estimates, erection, installation, and supervision of the construction of streets, bridges, highways, railroads, airports, and hangars, port, canals, river and shore improvements, lighthouses and dry docks, buildings, fixed structures for irrigation, flood protection, drainage, water supply and sewerages works, demolition of permanent structures and tunnels. The enumeration of any work in this section shall not be construed as excluding any other work requiring civil engineering knowledge and application. Second is the civil engineer shall exercise reasonable skill, care, and diligence in the performance of his obligation. Third is the civil engineer shall act independently and as required by the contract, perform with the necessary skills and professional judgment when required to certify, decide, or exercise discretion between the client and a third party with whom the client has contract. Fourth is the civil engineer is authorized to act as the client's faithful agent when required but only as implied in Section 2 or implied in the contract adopted for the project. Next is the civil engineer shall give written notice to the client containing particular of the change. Next is the civil engineer shall not initiate or proceed with any subsequent stages of the service without the approval of the client. Next is the civil engineer shall notify the client of any interest the civil engineer has which significantly conflict with the interest of the client under their contract. Next, the civil engineer shall direct and cooperate with all other professionals and integrate their work where applicable into the being undertaken by the civil engineer and other professions but shall not be professionally liable for this work. And lastly, the civil engineer may recommend specialist suppliers and or contractors to design and execute certain parts of the works, in which case the civil engineer shall coordinate the designs of such or parts with the overall designs of the works, but he or she shall be relieved of all the responsibility for the design, manufacture, installation, and performance of any such part or parts of the works. So that would be all. Thank you for listening.